and raised?
Great to be here. I was born in Roma in central southern Queensland and home of Artie Beetson and Darren Lockyer, for some of you who claim to fame anyway. But I was born out there, and then we came back to the Redcliffe area, which is near Brisbane in Queensland, before doing most of my growing up really in Mullaney on a dairy farm. My dad was a share farmer. And so most of my early years were spent in that rural context in Mullaney.
Okay, there you go. Did you have a religious upbringing?
I did, actually. So basically, Mum and Dad went to the Baptist church in Mullaney, the Baptist Tabernacle it was called. It's a tattoo parlour now, which shows how times have changed. But we grew up, went to church quite regularly, actually. And my mum and dad are both committed followers of Jesus.
And tell us about your conversion experience. Was it like at a youth camp, or were you always just a believer?
No, I probably wasn't always a believer. I guess it was a young age, like a lot of people. We had our journey towards Jesus, particularly if you grew up in a Christian household, started quite early, but probably about 12 years old. I remember it's probably not a real vision because I can see myself, but I responded at a youth camp down on the Gold Coast. So that was sort of the beginnings of my faith journey, and of course lots of things between then and now.
Now, talking about Mullaney, I remember preaching at a youth camp there at a macadamia farm.
Yeah,
have you been to that one?
I have been to that farm.
And the guy that runs it was my wife's youth pastor.
You're kidding.
What was the guy's name? Do you know that?
No, you got me on the spot there.
But it's a well-known youth camp location, or church camp location up at Mullaney. So lots of good things come out of Mullaney, eh?
Oh, they do, including some great milk.
That's right, Mullaney Dairies. We have it here at the radio, actually. We all love it here.
So good.
It's very good. And tell us a bit about your journey into ministry. Like, what kind of career did you have when you finished school?
I worked in banks, actually, for 10 years, different banks, and that was a great part of my story. I had a little bit of a go at being a groundsman at a school just about around the time I got married. I was hopeless at that. So, but the calling to Bible college came during that particular period for Ellie and me, my wife and I. And we came up to Queensland, actually, to study, and that was the beginning of my journey in vocational ministry, which was, as you say, about 24 years plus, because I still consider myself doing that, even though I'm not in a mainstream situation.
So Ipswich Baptist Church, what was the name of the church there?
Yeah, Ipswich Baptist Church. Loved it.
Yeah. Did you do a lot of work like among the homeless there? What kind of ministry?
We did, actually. So we it was a very formal church and had a long history in a very traditional sort of building, but it was in the main street of town, and a lot of social issues in that part of Ipswich. And so we bought a building across the road, which had been used as a brothel, actually, and we converted it into a place for people to come and be. And even though we didn't think about it at the time, it was actually the beginning of a simple church experience for people who had lots of mental health issues. And it was really a place to belong, where Jesus was at the centre. So that was a very important part of the story of Ipswich Baptist Church.
Wonderful. And then you're at Townsville as well?
Yeah, I was at Townsville for 8 years. And that's really where my heart for rural and remote grew, because I guess when you're out of the city and you're way up there, it's a city, a lovely place actually, Townsville, but it is remote still. And I first got my glimpse of the hundreds and hundreds of small communities scattered across Northern Australia at the time, but my vision's grown a bit since then, but realising that the standard model of church wasn't going to be able to be sustained in those places. So that was the beginning of my red dirt journey during my time up there.
Well, we are going to get into the red dirt journey, but important question first. Do you still support the Broncos, or did you convert to the Cowboys when you moved to town?
Well, I was chaplain for the Cowboys for 5 years.
Right.
So that's probably my heart team. I was chappy for Broncos too.
Really?
For a while.
Okay.
But at the moment, and I have been chaplain for Norths Devils, which is a Queensland rugby league club. Makes a great hashtag. Chaplain for the Devils. But chaplaincy is a big part of my story too.
Okay, fantastic. So Broncos, how long were you chaplain for the Broncos?
I was only there for a year because I thought we were in Brisbane to stay, but we went back and had a stint in North Queensland again, stirring up this kind of thing I'm involved in now. But it was the year that Wayne Bennett was transitioning out, and it was quite a tumultuous year for the Broncos, but it was good to be there. I still know a lot of players, preparing one of them for marriage at the moment.
Yeah.
And that's basically been part of my story.
Well, they desperately need your prayers at the moment.
Well, they've got another chappie there, and he's doing great.
Yeah. Well, I know Bill Hunter was there for many years.
Yeah,
he's finished up.
That's right. He was there for over 20.
Yeah.
And so I was there to replace him, but that didn't quite work out that way. So the new guy, Andy's been there for a couple of years now, and he's doing great.
Andy, what's Andy's last name?
Can't remember right now.
Okay, but Andy, okay, there you go. We'll need to be praying for Andy because the Broncos need all the help they can get. And, Robbo, who does the breakfast show here, Rise and Shine, he's a mad Cowboys supporter.
Yeah.
So what was your time like as a chaplain with them?
Oh, I really loved it. The Cowboys are a everyone belongs club. Club cultures are really important, and they are different in different clubs. But I think at the time, JT and others really created this situation where there were no big egos. We're all in this together, and it was a wonderful time there. I left in 2014, and they won the premiership in 2015. So that might tell you something about my chaplaincy anyway.
There you go. And tell us about the dream for Red Dirt Church. How did it all begin?
Well, it all began really with championing people in local communities who already have the basics of a Christian faith. They might have real connectivity in that local town or community, wherever they're a part of. And it was about how could we scaffold people like that to actually start a simple faith community, because the traditional model involving buildings and stipends, it works in some places but not in a lot. So we had to think differently about how would God start his church in all sorts of places. And so we had to think in terms of disorganized religion.
Disorganized religion, I like that. That's a good slogan. And tell us a bit about where they are. Where are the Red Dirt churches right now?
Well, the latest one we started is in Port Augusta in South Australia. They're sprinkled around Queensland. We have one. A couple of people have been repping for us in New South Wales. So the idea is that it will have a growing national footprint. But Queensland is where the heartland has been to this point.
And what if your town has brown dirt? Are you still allowed to start one there?
Yeah, you can start a Red Dirt wherever you are. And really the Red Dirt imagery is symbolic of Australia generally. And obviously it's got that rural and remote idea that it riffs off as well.
Yeah, so tell us a bit about the heart behind it. We love our big churches with smoke machines and lights and big PAs, but you're really just getting back to the basics.
Yeah,
what's it look like?
Well, I've led churches with all of those things, and I think they're wonderful too. So it's not a case of either or.
Yeah.
We're all in this together. But essentially, we can't really afford to have models where we need specialists for everything. And I was part of churches growing to be quite large actually, and you really do have to have people with specialized skills to pull off the different aspects of big church ministry, and that's fantastic. But if you need to work with whoever's there in a small town, then you have to not think in terms of those specializations, but how can we do something simple, sustainable, for people who aren't experts necessarily.
And is it connected to any denomination at all?
No, we're going to sort of journey with the Baptist Church, because that's my history. We've talked about that today. But the Baptist movement is very state-based, and God really has laid on my heart to create a network that has a national footprint. So without there being any problems, we sort of came out from under that, and it's basically interdenominational church.
And tell us a bit about, what does a Red Dirt service look like? Do you always have some worship music? Do you have communion? What does it look like?
Oh, they're different everywhere, and that's really what we celebrate about Red Dirt. People have different passions and skill sets locally, and really it's bringing those to the boil and trying to encourage, of course, a breadth of experience. But yes is the answer to that question. Yeah, and it depends on where you are. Some of them have a real social justice orientation. Some of them have a real worship ministry orientation, but so they're all quite different and often reflect either the people leading them or the little community that they're a part of, and that's the point.
Well, I was curious to watch, on your website, you've got a great little video, and it explains, correct me if I'm wrong, that there are 15,000 communities in Australia and only 13,000 churches. Is that right?
Yeah, so that's data from Australian Towns, I think it's called. So basically we think that there are a lot of churches covering everywhere. That's not really true when you start to pull the data apart. And what that means is there are hundreds and hundreds of communities without necessarily an obvious faith community there, Christian faith community. And so we really want to work in those gaps. That's the heart of Red Dirt. We don't compete with anybody. We're all in this together. But there are so many gaps out there. That includes rural and remote places. It also includes certain subcultures, people that may not really fit with the average churches we know it these days, who nevertheless can be invited to be a part of a life of following Jesus, and also a faith community that riffs off some of the rhythms of whatever that subculture might be.
And, Vision is in 740 communities around Australia now.
So good.
And, we often say that they're like little Billy Grahams preaching the gospel in those communities.
Yeah.
Billy can't travel around Australia. Well, he's gone to be with the Lord now, but his grandson Will has been to Australia a number of times, and he's been to Alice Springs and Kalgoorlie and Broken Hill. He can't travel everywhere,
No.
but Vision can. And there might be people listening in a community now and thinking, there's actually no church nearby me. How do they start a Red Dirt church? What's the process?
Well, we've made it as simple as possible because we want to make it as accessible as possible for people. So obviously there are some pretty important things to cover off on. One of them is child safe, to make sure that people are safe with children and vulnerable people. A basic faith statement, so that there's a basic understanding of the Christian gospel and doctrine that's generally accepted widely across the Christian church. And then that you have some of those simple skill sets of gathering and hosting. And so if there's not a lot of hoops actually to jump through, and we try and create a relationship with these people as we go. I mean, most of them are working full time. They might be a farmer or a pharmacist in a town or something, so they've got a big job to do. We don't want to clutter them up with a lot of admin-y things. Our job is to make sure they're the right sort of people and then release them into whatever their calling is in the place God's led them.
And what kind of support do you provide for those that are running the Red Dirt churches?
So basically there's personal support from me and any mentoring that might be needed. We have a little cluster of Red Dirt churches up in the Wide Bay area, and they have an area advocate there, so someone that sort of brings that little group of people together a bit more often. Mm-hmm. So we have a cluster orientation as we grow. But basically the support from me, there are resources available, and we have an app which has daily readings and some teaching on there, so that you don't have to do the teaching side of a church. In fact, I was here a while ago, and Vision Radio has such great teaching. So there could be just something that a Red Dirt listens to on Vision every week, and then when they meet together, they discuss whatever they heard together.
So how do people find your app?
The app is called Red Dirt Spirit, and it's available on all the app places.
Okay, and you developed that yourself, hey?
Yeah, we did, because basically what we want to do is create a situation where someone hosting a Red Dirt church can just get everything they need in the app.
Yeah.
Now, no one has to do that. There's a lot of freedom with Red Dirt Church, so you don't have to do any of these things I'm talking about, but we do want to make resources available so that it's totally doable.
Well, I love the whole